Morning, everybody. So I firmly believe, and I'm going to just stand by this claim this morning, that there are two kinds of people in the world, and only two kinds of people. Those who like to keep score, and those who keep score but don't really say that they want to keep score. Because I think everybody actually keeps score. I think we all have a scoreboard going on in our mind. We were talking about basketball there for a little while, and of course, with the championships going on and all the tournaments happening in the NBA right now, like score is a big deal. If you score the most points, you move on. If you don't score the most points, you don't move on. And like even as a little kid when I was growing up, I didn't really want to keep score because I was not the athlete. I was not the one with the prowess on the court or anything like that. So I didn't want to keep score, but I always still found myself keeping score. Even in games that don't actually have scores, like putting together a puzzle. Our family does puzzles a lot. And even there, we'll be putting together the puzzle, and I just want to make sure that I am beating the other people at the table with how well I can put the puzzle together. I think we all keep score somehow, for some reason, in our heads. And we have a scoreboard. You may not call it a scoreboard, but we all have them going on in our minds. We keep score in our marriage. Who apologized last? Who's carrying more weight around the home? Who owes us an easier evening because we've had a hard day? We keep a score at work. Who's just coasting and who got the promotion even though they spend most of their time surfing the internet and pretty much everything they do comes from ChatGPT anyway, so they're obviously not pulling their weight. We keep score with our kids. Who's sacrificed the most and who has been, owing us more than they could ever imagine. We keep score with ourselves. And this is really the harshest one, I think, for a lot of us. We have a running tally in our minds of when we've fallen short and all of the things that we have done wrong in our lives, and we remember those things. It's hard to forget the things that we have done that have fallen short of God's glory. And we understand transactions. We get it. We get it what it means to work hard and get paid back for that hard work. And if you break the rules, you should pay for it. This is the scales of our justice system, the scales of our scoreboard is how we think. But there's a terrifying side of living on a scoreboard like that. What happens when you're losing? What happens when you're not doing well? What happens when you're the one who doesn't deserve the great marriage? What happens when you're the one whose kids unbelievably still talk to you even though you haven't treated them very well? What happens when you've been given another shot year after year after year and you just haven't pulled your weight? It is exhausting to think about the scoreboard kind of life. And really, it's terrifying to think about trying to keep score, and somewhere deep down, we know that the score isn't in our favor. We know that we're never going to be ahead. We're never going to be the ones winning the game, so to speak. And so, what happens, though, when we have this scoreboard in our minds, sometimes we carry this forward into thinking that that's how God operates. We begin to think about God in the ways that God keeps score. And God is with those who are winning the game, and he is against those who are not winning the game. And there's a column with our name in it, and the day that the books get closed, wherever column we were in, if we were in the winning column, then we get to be saved. If we were in the losing column, we get lost forever. And what I want to talk about this morning is a continuation of a series that we've been in the middle of. We're going to talk about the grace of God. Because for 2 weeks we've been looking back in the story of Exodus 34 when the children of Israel were at Mount Sinai. And God had opportunity to tell them who he was. The first lesson we talked about was how in the midst of betrayal, God said that he would stay with them, that he wouldn't leave them, even though he had every reason to walk away. God was the God who stayed. And then he spoke over the people his own name And the first word that he used when he said who he was a God of compassion, a God of deep, like almost womb-like, motherly love, a deep ache that the Father had over his people. And so today we're going to hit the second word that God uses to refer to himself. And this word doesn't just adjust the scoreboard or swing the scales in another direction. No, this is God's grace giving us what we don't deserve. God's grace giving us life, even though we don't deserve it. Because so often we think that God gives wages to the worthy, that the scoreboard of God must mean that he's only giving those people who are winning in life the favor and the blessing. But we'll see this morning that is not the case. And so sometimes, as we've been looking at, sometimes we build these calves, we build these false gods, we revise God, we change him into something that he's not. And once we have this scoreboard running in our minds, we can't help but imagine that God is watching that scoreboard too. And so we begin to be terrified of owing a debt that we cannot pay. And so we build a God who fits the system that we already understand, a God who runs the numbers, a God who keeps the books, a God who has this system where if we do our quiet time, where we give our money, and we show up on Sundays, then he'll owe us a good life. And you may never say it that way. You actually may think to yourself, well, I've never said that in my life. But have you ever thought about God in this way? Have you ever thought that God is just giving us, quote unquote, what we owe? And so we rebuild a God. We turn into our own God, like this false God that they built back in Exodus chapter 32. We build a God that runs the numbers. We imagine that God is a God who runs the numbers. And here's what happens. When we build a God who is a transactional God like this, we begin to split his people in half. Because on one side, we have people who think they're winning. People who think that they're 30 years into their service, they serve, they give, they've got the receipts, and somewhere along the way, they just have stopped expecting anything from God because they figure they're all paid up. They've started looking down on people who aren't. And of course, you know where we're headed now, Luke chapter 18. We studied this really, really thoroughly in our class, but I want to just read it again in light of this conversation about the scoreboard of God. Luke chapter 18, Jesus is talking about two people who one of them thinks he has got it figured out, that he is winning. And these people don't call this pride. They just call it taking their faith seriously. So Jesus tells this story in Luke 18, verse 9, where he says, he told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. Thank you, Luke, by the way, for including that introduction, because he clarifies what's going on. So here it is in verse 10. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. A Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. He is reading God's scoreboard. He is reciting his stats. He is fasting. He's tithing. He is comparing himself to other people and who he's not like. And Jesus says that this man walked home unjustified. This guy thought he was winning. His scoreboard, he thought, was ahead. But the scoreboard didn't save this Pharisee. The transactions that this Pharisee thought he had put in did buy him nothing. And then we get to the other side of this, the people who absolutely know that they're losing. Continue reading with me. But the tax collector in verse 13, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Notice what Jesus is saying there. Jesus is saying that this is about humility and pride. Humility shows us that I am not winning. I know I'm losing. I know I have sinned. I know I don't deserve it. Pride stands up and says, I have the scoreboard and the stats, and I can show you how awesome I am, God. There are people maybe in the Lord's church today who know that they're losing, who knows that they are not going to be able to stand before God with their credits, with their credentials, and they need to know and understand that God reaches out to them. Notice how Jesus says that this man, the humble man who said, I'm not even worth it, was the one who went home justified. Why do we keep rebuilding a God who is transactional like this, though? I think it's because we want control. We want to believe that we can earn our way, that we can knuckle down and do enough and be the kinds of people who just get control of ourselves in just the right way so that we can then earn somehow God's favor. But when we put God on a scoreboard, when we imagine that God is a transactional God, that is terrifying. Because we all know deep down that we're losing. We all know deep down that our sins are too much for us to bear. And so, back in Exodus chapter 32, when the children of Israel were standing at Mount Sinai and Moses took a little bit too long to come down from the mountain, they built their own God. Because they wanted a God that they could see, a God they could manage, and a God that would fit into their lifestyle. And so this is not the God who we read about in a few chapters, as we'll see in Exodus chapter 34, verse 6. This is what God says of himself. This is who God says that he is. We go to the mountain, and in these words, we see that Yahweh is a God compassionate and gracious. Now, for the context of those who may not have been here for the first two lessons, remember where this is happening. This is right after the people had built this calf. This is right after the people are rejecting God, and God still says, I am a God compassionate, and here that we'll talk about gracious. I am a God who is gracious, he says of himself. And so this should really stop us in our tracks, because this word gracious in the Hebrew, we're not going to go into the Hebrew very much, but the word is chanun, and the word is about showing favor or giving a gift to someone who has no claim over it. This is a word not about giving to somebody who's worthy of the gift, but about somebody who is completely unworthy of the gift. And isn't that exactly what we see at the mountain? Should God give the children of Israel a gift after what they've just done? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They have just rejected him. And so this idea is specifically about someone with no leverage, no standing, and nothing to offer in return. And this word, when God refers to himself as gracious, would have been absolutely scandalous in the time in which this was written. Because in the ancient Near East, in these, especially even in the Greco-Roman societies, the whole economy was built off of honor. And when gifts were given to people, they were never given down the ladder. They were always given up the ladder or across the ladder. So you gave somebody who could benefit you a gift. You gave a king a gift. You gave somebody in a peer position to you a gift. But you never gave a gift to the person down on the social economic ladder below you. That is what grace is about, though. This word, grace, is telling us about breaking the economy, breaking the way that we want to hold up the scoreboard in our life. This is God moving towards a people who cannot elevate him and who cannot repay him in any way. This is God, the King, giving a gift down the ladder to the people at the very bottom who don't deserve it. And isn't that what we see at the mountain? the people don't deserve this gift. The people don't deserve a God who is gracious. This is not a faithful people. This is not a people who have earned it. This is people who just built a calf. And so the first audience to hear these words, I am gracious, this is not God rewarding good behavior. This is not God paying back the ones who won the game or completed the scoreboard. No, this is God showing up where there was no good behavior and there was no reward. So we have heard God is gracious so many times in our churches, in our songs. We sing about it all the time. We pray about it. When we think about God being gracious, it's I view it like refrigerator magnets or vinyl stickers on your wall. Like people will put these really flowery, poetic language on their refrigerator or on their wall somehow, and then eventually you just stop seeing it. It becomes noise in the background, and we don't even think about what it really means. But the first audience to hear these words would have been shocked by what is going on here. And so Moses, standing on the mountain with the second set of tablets, now gets to see that God is a God who is not just holy, not just, but he is patient with a people who are broken. And so this is grace not given as wages to the worthy, but this is grace given to those who are unworthy, life given to those who don't deserve it. And when I think about that, what does that actually mean for me today? What does it mean for me not to have to be the cleaned up, perfect version of myself, to not to have to just knock the scoreboard out of the park this year or next year, the actual me? The one with struggle, the one with sin, the one who is trying but just has not ever made it completely. As long as you are worshiping a God who runs the scoreboard, you're never going to hear the God of Exodus 34, who comes to people who are absolutely not worthy. And so if we want to really see this in full display, let's go to Luke chapter 23. If you're in Luke 18, we'll just flip over to Luke 23 here, because this story that we get into in Luke 23 helps us to really see what Jesus did. And of course, Jesus is the exact imprint of God. And so what happens to God when he says, I am a God who is gracious on the mountain? He comes down in flesh in the person of Jesus and demonstrates his grace to us. And so this scene here in Luke chapter 23, we'll read from verse 39 to 43. This is at the account of Jesus in his crucifixion. It says, one of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said, Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. So Jesus is being crucified here in this scene. And two men who are being executed alongside of him, one on each side, these are both criminals. And the word that's being used here for these criminals, these were thieves, but this is more than thievery. This is like insurrection. These are rebels. These guys absolutely deserve to be on the cross, and we know that Jesus did not. Both of these guys are in the same situation. They are both dying, and they both have the same view of Jesus because they are one on each side of him, but they respond in completely opposite ways. Let's talk about the first man for a second. He is mocking Jesus. He's saying, Save yourself and us. That is not prayer, by the way. That first man is taunting Jesus. He is trying to get Jesus to do what he wants to do. Can I put it in the language of our sermon? He is trying to make a transaction with Jesus. Jesus, prove who you are. Prove that you are who you say you are and get us down and make all of this go away. He's bartering with Jesus. He's trying to transact with Jesus. He still wants Jesus to perform on his own terms. He is still keeping the score, even to the end. Even with the nails in his hands, he is still negotiating with the God of heaven in the person of Jesus. And this is going to maybe be hard for us to hear and think about, but I think we are too often the first man on the cross. I think too often we are the people who are thinking that we've got time, thinking that we've got margin, and trying to reason with God and negotiate with God and tell God, well, I'm going to do this thing so that you'll do that thing for me. That we've still got enough on the scoreboard and we don't really need to worry about our situation because God is going to take care of it because I am such an amazing person. The first thief isn't condemned because his sin was worse than the other one. He had the same crimes and the same sentence, but he is lost because he never stops trying to manage Jesus. He never stops trying to transact with God. He wants grace on his terms, and we need to understand that grace has never come down to those terms. Grace was never about the scoreboard. It was never about negotiating with God. But then we get to the second man. We get to the second man on the cross who has nothing. He can't get down. He can't undo what he's done. He can't promise to do better. He is just going to have to hang there and own up to what he's done. And on his life, the scoreboard is closed. If you think about it from a transaction standpoint, he can't do any more. There's not another day, another moment where he gets to live. He is counting down to his last breaths. He doesn't recite his stats like the Pharisee in Luke 18 telling about all the great things he's done. No, in fact, he just owns it all, like the tax collector. Be gracious to me, a sinner, may very well be the language that he's using. He doesn't say, Jesus, look what I've done in your name. Look what I've prophesied. Look at the demons I've cast out. Here's my resume. Can you please consider me? No, that's not what this second man does. Instead, he turns and asks for a gift. After owning up to his sin, after saying that, yes, they deserve rightly what they're getting, he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And that is such a different way of putting it than that first man put it. That's it. That's the whole prayer of this man. Remember me. No leverage, no claim, no negotiation by this man. This is a dying man asking a dying king to remember his name. If Jesus were the God that we keep building, or that the people, the children of Israel, built, if Jesus were a transactional God, what would he have said in that moment? Jesus might have said, well, it's too late. You didn't put in the work. You should have figured this out 20 years ago, but you haven't done that. It's too late for you. But no, what does Jesus say to him? Today, you will be with me in paradise. Not after some probation period, not after some like restitution and paying it off. No, he says, today, you will be with me in paradise. He has hours left to live. And yet Jesus says today. This verse is Exodus 34, a God who is gracious in the flesh. This is Jesus demonstrating that he truly is the God who is gracious. Hanging in front of this undeserving person without any reason to have any claim over Jesus, and for him to say, today you'll be with me in paradise, is just amazing. The thief, by the way, is not the exception to the rule. I know many people want to go to this story and say, this is the exception to the rule, right? We can't be saved like the thief, and we won't even get into that right now because the conversation would go too long. But I do want to say that he is absolutely the picture of what Jesus does for us. The thief is the picture because we need to understand that it will never be about what we do and the scoreboard that we put our accomplishments on. No, it's always about the grace as unworthy as we are. We're all going to end up where this second thief is. Not on a cross necessarily, but in a moment where that scoreboard closes and we have nothing left to offer, where there's some diagnosis we can't figure out, there's some failure in our life that we can't fix, some relationship that is just too far gone, beyond repair, some death in our family, and a morning when we wake up and we realize that the version of ourselves that we've been putting together and performing for God is actually not going to save us. Because we will never be able to do enough. And will we finally at that moment say, Jesus, remember me? Jesus, remember me. So here's where we are. Here's the whole deal this morning. This is all where we're leading to. We need to stop running the scoreboard. We need to stop running the scoreboard. We need to stop waiting for ourselves to get cleaned up before we come to God, thinking that somehow we're just not worthy enough, we're too far gone, and God would never love a sinner like us. He loves exactly the sinner like you. He passed by Moses on the mountain when his people literally had betrayed him and said that I am a God who is gracious. And then he came down and took on flesh and lived a life and said to that thief on the cross, today you'll be with me in paradise. That is the God who we serve today, a God who is gracious. And so we need to stop running the scoreboard. Because some of us have been running it our whole life. We've been keeping score ever since we were kids, score with our parents, our siblings, our teachers, our score with God, thinking that we just have to do enough, live the right kind of life, and then everything will go well for us. And some of us are convinced that we're winning. Some of us have put in the years, we've been through it, we've gotten 30 years of service in, or however many years, and you suspect that you've stopped needing Jesus along the way somewhere. But the scoreboard will always be lying to you. The scoreboard is always lying to us because we're not ahead. We are the thief on the cross, and we need to stop keeping score. But then there's another category of people who are convinced that they're losing, and they are so down and discouraged because they know their sins are so far removing them from God. And these are the kinds of people who need to hear the message that God is gracious. And he extends his love and patience and compassion to those who don't deserve it. And that's every one of us. Jesus is not waiting for you to fix it to extend his grace to you. He's not standing in the back of the room with his arms crossed, waiting for you to get clean, waiting for you to get it all figured out. No, he is there for you and wants you to receive him. So we need to stop running the scoreboard. But this is, again, where it gets uncomfortable, because if God has torn up the scoreboard that he's keeping on you, well, then you don't get to keep running the scoreboard on everyone else. And so just a little mini sermon inside of a sermon. When we think about God who is gracious, who forgives us of our sins, then we have to start thinking about how God is a God who extends that forward to other people. And Matthew chapter 18 is where God talks about this, where God talks about a man who was forgiven a debt. Jesus says that this man in this story was forgiven a debt that he could never pay back. He owed so much money to a king who forgave him, and the king let all the debt go. And then that man went out, and what did he do? He found somebody else who owed him a little bit of money, not a huge amount, but a little bit of money. And he choked him, and he said, "Pay me back what you owe." And that original king, who forgave him his massive debt, looked at his unforgiving attitude and threw him in jail and made him pay back the whole bit. This story is in the Bible because it is so hard. Because we want to think that grace is free, but grace is absolutely free, but it's not cheap. Grace costs us so much. Grace costs us holding over the head of other people the things that they've done against us. Grace means we need to forgive other people because we've been forgiven. because we know that the math does not work out. If we hold something over someone else when we've been forgiven so much, God will not forgive us if we're unwilling to forgive other people. We know that grace isn't cheap because grace cost Jesus his life. And when he calls us to forgive others, then that is absolutely what we should do. Grace is not about changing our lives so that we can earn admission into heaven. But grace changes us and shows us that we are welcome. Grace absolutely transforms us. Titus chapter 2, verses 11 and 12 talk about how grace trains us, and it shapes us and molds us into a holy people. And so we don't clean ourselves up to come to Jesus. We come to Jesus and he cleans us up. Christ cleans us up. Christ transforms us. We don't need to earn a seat at his table. We need to sit down at the table and let the table start rearranging our entire lives. We do change. We do transform into the image of Jesus Christ, but we don't do it before we come to the Lord. We come to the Lord and let him change us. And that helps us to stop running the scoreboard. And so the call this morning is really just to receive the grace that we couldn't earn. None of us can earn it. The scoreboard is against us. We do not serve a transactional God who holds against us all of our faults and failures. He is a God who lets those things go in his grace when we turn to him and call on his name. And so we're about to stand and sing here in just a second, but if there's anyone here who's not given their life to Christ yet, like the thief, maybe it's time for you to call on Jesus. Maybe it's time for you to come and be baptized in his name this morning, not because there's anything special in these waters, not because these waters are going to save you necessarily, but because it is an appeal to God for a clean conscience where he washes away our sins and raises us up out of those waters a new creature without having to deal with the fault and penalty of death. And maybe you're already in the family, but you've walked away. Maybe you've been carrying something heavy. Maybe you've been dealing with something difficult and you need the prayers of this group. Maybe you have a scoreboard that you just can't seem to put down. It's time to stop carrying that stuff. Come and let your church family pray with you, and let those words that God spoke over his people in Exodus 34 speak over you. That God is gracious to all who are struggling and to all who are weighed down by sin. If anyone needs to come and respond to the Lord, please come as we stand and sing.